I think a big part of this is that as Americans, we've been kind of conditioned to view Muslims and Arabs as terrorists. And that's kind of that's basically the message that I grew up with as a kid,
Uh,
going through 9/11 and then the 20 years of this war on terror, this idea that these Muslims are terrorists. And I see that often when I post little clips of our videos. That's often a
right.
big response that gets responded like, oh, these are just terrorist countries. We need to teach them a
Mhm.
lesson. They're attacking Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself from terrorists and terrorism. And that's the messaging that's going out constantly. And it's so ingrained in our psyche that it's very difficult to combat. So how would you respond to that
Yeah.
type of
Well,
messaging?
first of all, I'll say, look, there's well over 1 billion Muslims in the world, and they're a large and varied group. The actual terrorists, the Sunni extremists, Islamists, are are a very small minority. Now they're real. So Islamic terrorism is a real thing. It's a real problem. I'm not pretending that it isn't. Um, but actually, the victims, probably the most common victims of Islamic terrorism, are not Americans or Western Europeans, but other Muslims. A lot of Muslims themselves have suffered at the hands of these people. Now look at Syria. I mean, uh, we had Al Nusra and ISIS there, and well, guess who was supporting Al Nusra? It was the good old U.S. of A. We had another Al Qaeda, I think it was Al Qaeda in the Yemeni Peninsula, and for at least a while in the Yemen war, guess who was supporting it? The good old U.S. of A. Right? Um, so this notion that somehow we're opposed to Islamic terrorism is actually blatantly false. We've talked about how actually the U.S. has a long history of using Muslim extremists, and so does Israel. Israel is actually, like in Syria, in fact, what treated Al Nusra, Al Nusra is really the local Al Qaeda um, outfit there in Syria. They treated wounded Al Nusra soldiers and sent them back into to Syria to continue fighting. Um, so, yeah, Islamic terrorism of a certain kind is a problem. But again, we're not actually. I think you could make a better case that like organizations like Hezbollah or a country, a government like the Iranian government, are are these are organizations, forces that have been consistently opposed to this kind of terrorism and have often, suffered at the hands of it. We don't. I guess a lot of the people have this black and white view, which is that innocent Americans and evil Muslims. Okay, there are some. Now, if you're over in the Muslim world, yeah, if you're an average Muslim, you probably can't stand these extremists, these ISIS types. You consider them your enemy, and Muslims have fought them, and a lot of Muslims have been killed by them, right? Um, but you look at the world and you see, well, who's killing us? Yeah, it's ISIS, but it's also Israel. It's also the U.S. That's they've done even more damage to us than ISIS. I'm sorry, but we've got blood on our hands, and yeah, in the Muslim world has again, it's a large and varied place. And if you can't paint it with a broad brush and just describe all these people as extremists, that's an easy excuse. It's a lazy way of thinking, and it leads to horrible results. You got to stop and look and understand what's going on. These people aren't all the same, right? It may be easy. Maybe you don't understand it, so you just say, "Yeah, kill them all." That's not that's not the way to go about it. Understand who are Shia and who are Sunni. Who are the who are the jihadists. And who are the secularists and so on and so forth. It's important to know who you're dealing with and to act appropriately. The average
Hmm.
American citizen doesn't. He assumes they're all the same. They all have turbans. They're all crazy. They all want to kill them. That's just utterly false. Now, the people in the CIA, they know what's going on, but they're just extremely cynical, and they use those extremists to achieve their objectives, and often with the result that many normal Muslims die.
And I guess the one, this terrorist act that goes through that maybe was supported by the CIA or Mossad utilizing these terrorist groups, then they can easily paint the whole group. Look, they're all terrorists. That's just what Muslims do. They're terrorists, and that kind of feeds into that narrative. Um, yeah, I don't think it's something that is going to be easily dispelled, because the problem is most people don't want to take the time to actually
Right.
learn these
Yeah.
things and
Well,
to understand what the
yeah.
region is like. I mean, I mean, for me, someone that's, I've talked to you about these things, that have been to Palestine, I've been to Jordan, and even for me, it's complicated. I
Yeah. Well, I
don't
don't.
want to say that I
Right. I
understand
understand something
it.
about it, but yeah,
It's
it's infinitely complex. It's a very, it's a large part of the world with, a long history. And yeah, so let's not get, let's not again paint it with a broad brush. That's just again a way of uh, a sure road to failure and to disaster. And that's, that
hmm,
that's what we've seen. Well, I just want to
right.
talk about the ignorance of
Oh,
Americans. I think the most famous example is George W. Bush. Like he never understood the difference between Sunnis and Shia. He went ahead and invaded this country, right? And he didn't know a thing about it. And the result was a disaster, right? It was a disaster. Maybe a million people dead, millions and millions of refugees. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't bother to understand, the people that you decided to make an enemy. So,
right. The scary thing is, people are so quick to pass judgment and make a
right,
decision online without having any knowledge, thinking about the consequences of pushing for
yeah,
something like this. Like seeing these people say, "Yeah, they're just terrorists. We got to blow them all up and make a big crater out of the Middle
right.
East." It's such a crazy way of thinking, and I just wonder, how do people get to that state where you can just be so nonchalant and to say,
Well, I mean, a lot.
is it
Yeah,
part of
well,
the
I think a lot of
problem?
people, first of all, just have very little experience of dealing with, actual Muslims or even people from foreign countries. It's especially true within the U.S., right? Um, and so it's just easy to present some sort of caricature of those people.